Welcome back to our series on Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales. Today's topic is the universal call to devotion. You might think that devotion is only for those who live in monasteries or cloisters, but St. Francis de Sales has something quite different to say. Let's dive into his teaching on how devotion is for everyone, including you and me. Devotion is for every state of life. St. Francis de Sales begins by telling us that devotion is not confined to those who have left the world behind. It is not just for monks, nuns, or priests living in solitude. He explains that each person, whether a soldier, a nobleman, a workman, a married person, or a religious, is called to live a devout life according to their situation. St. Francis teaches that God gives each of us the grace to live a devout life right where we are. Whether you are in ministry, managing a parish, teaching in a school, or serving the poor, devotion can and should be a part of your everyday life. To illustrate this, he compares devotion to plants. Just as each plant bears its own fruit in different environments, each of us can bear the fruit of devotion in whatever life God has placed us. For example, take Saint Joseph, who was a carpenter. He didn't live in a monastery, but his whole life was dedicated to doing God's will. His devotion wasn't any less than that of Saint Benedict or Saint Francis of Assisi. It was simply lived out in a different way. That's what St. Francis de Sales is telling us. Every vocation, whether in the world or in the church, can be lived with true devotion. Misconceptions about devotion. One of the biggest misconceptions about devotion, according to St. Francis de Sales, is that it makes life harder, that it's only suitable for those who live in isolation or have the luxury of time. But he says this isn't true at all. Devotion, when rightly understood, doesn't weigh us down. It actually makes our lives lighter. He explains that devotion doesn't take us away from our duties or daily life. Instead, it perfects them. It helps us to live with more love, patience, and joy. So, whether you are balancing ministry with your own spiritual life or juggling the demands of parish work, devotion is meant to make everything flow more smoothly, not less. The role of devotion in ministry and community life. As religious, many of you are likely serving in busy ministries, whether as teachers, parish priests, formators, social workers, or in hospitals. St. Francis de Sales tells us that far from being a distraction, devotion strengthens us in these responsibilities. For those in active ministry, true devotion will make your service to others more compassionate, more patient, and more Christ-centered. It's not about separating ourselves from the world or our duties, but about bringing our whole hearts into everything we do. Imagine how much more fruitful your ministry can be when it is rooted in prayer, the sacraments, and a sincere love for God and His people. Practical examples of living devotion in everyday life. So, how do we live out devotion in everyday life as religious? Here are a few practical suggestions from St. Francis de Sales. Tip 1. Start with prayer. Begin every task or encounter with a short prayer. Whether it's a meeting, a lesson, or simply speaking with someone, offer it to God beforehand. This will keep you centered and remind you that everything you do is part of your devotion. Tip 2. Integrate the sacraments. Frequent confession and receiving the Eucharist regularly are key to maintaining devotion. These sacraments are sources of grace that will help you live out your religious vows and keep your spirit fresh, especially in times of weariness. Tip 3. Cultivate joy in service. Finally, find joy in your service. St. Francis de Sales was known for his joyful spirit, and he tells us that true devotion fills our hearts with joy, even in difficult tasks. Today, look for small opportunities to bring joy to those around you, and you will find that devotion grows naturally. In summary, St. Francis de Sales teaches us that devotion isn't a one-size-fits-all practice. Whether you are serving as a parish priest, a nun teaching in a school, or a seminarian preparing for ministry, God calls each of us to live with devotion according to our unique situation. Let's remember that devotion is meant to perfect our everyday life, not separate us from it. By embracing devotion in your ministry, relationships, and daily responsibilities, you are answering the universal call to holiness and deepening your relationship with Christ. As we close this section, here are a few takeaways from today's session. Devotion is for everyone. Whether you are a priest, nun, or layperson, devotion fits into every life situation. Secondly, devotion makes life easier, not harder. When rooted in love, devotion gives meaning to your work and brings joy to your ministry. Thirdly, incorporate prayer into daily tasks. Every action, no matter how small, can be sanctified by offering it to God with love. Fourthly, frequent the sacraments. The Eucharist and confession are powerful sources of grace that help deepen your devotion. Fifth, joy in service is key. Let devotion fill your heart with joy, making even difficult tasks a source of spiritual growth. Thank you for joining me today. In our next video, we will talk about the purification of the soul and why it's so important for a life of devotion. See you then, and remember, live Jesus.